A seasoned school bus driver began noticing a young black girl quietly crying every afternoon during his route through Decatur, Georgia. Day by day, her silent sorrow grew harder to ignore, stirring a deep concern in his heart. One afternoon, after dropping off the last of the students, he made a decision he couldn't put off any longer. He walked back to her seat and looked beneath it, and what he found made his breath catch in his chest. Charles Baker adjusted his rearview mirror as the yellow school bus rumbled through the suburban streets of Decatur, Georgia. At 61, the retired Vietnam veteran had spent the last 6 years driving the Route 7 bus for Eastwood Middle School. The job gave him a sense of purpose, a reason to get up every morning. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the cracked sidewalks, and Charles tapped the steering wheel lightly, humming an old Sam Cooke tune under his breath. It was a typical Wednesday. The bus buzzed with chatter and laughter, sneakers squeaking on the rubber floor, backpacks thumping into seats. Kids shouted about the Braves game, about homework, about who said what on TikTok. Charles smiled faintly. Some things never changed. Yet as he glanced into the mirror again, his smile faded. There, in the third row, was the little girl he'd been worried about all week. Her name was Aaliyah Simmons, a quiet 6th grader who had only started riding his bus 2 weeks ago. She sat alone, small hands clenched in her lap, her head bent low. Through the gap in the seats, Charles could see the faint shimmer of tears on her cheeks. Every day, it was the same. Silent, hidden tears after the first few stops when the bus began to empty out. Today, though, something different caught his attention. As he made a sharp right onto Elmhurst Avenue, Charles caught a glimpse of Aaliyah bending over sharply, reaching down toward the floor under her seat. She stayed hunched over for a few seconds longer than seemed natural, her shoulders trembling. Then she sat up again quickly, swiping at her face with the sleeve of her denim jacket. Charles's gut tightened. He'd seen plenty of kids over the years who had rough patches, divorces, money problems, bullying. But something about Aaliyah's sorrow seemed heavier, deeper. He made a mental note to talk to her when he could do so gently without scaring her. Stop after stop. The bus grew quieter. By the time Charles turned onto Magnolia Lane, only 3 kids remained. Aaliyah's stop was the last one, near an aging set of apartment buildings with paint peeling off the rails. As they neared her drop-off, Charles pressed the brake pedal slowly, pulling up beside Building 14. "Here you go, sweetheart," he said softly. Aaliyah grabbed her battered purple backpack and shuffled toward the door without looking up. Charles noticed the way she hugged the bag tightly against her chest, as if it were a shield. Her sneakers scuffed the steps as she descended. She gave a brief wave without turning around and walked toward the cracked sidewalk leading to her apartment. Charles hesitated. Something gnawed at him. As he waited for her to disappear inside, he found his eyes drawn back to the seat where she had been. He thought again about the strange way she had leaned down earlier. His curiosity, or maybe it was something deeper, that old soldier's instinct, got the better of him. Climbing slowly out of his seat, he moved down the aisle, his boots heavy against the metal floor. When he reached the third row, he knelt, his knees protesting the movement with a sharp ache. Peering under the seat, he expected to find maybe a lost pencil, a crumpled tissue. Instead, he found something that made his breath hitch sharply in his throat. There, wedged between the seat frame and the ventilation grate, was a small, worn plastic lunchbox. It was cracked at the corners and covered in faded Disney princess stickers. Charles reached out carefully, tugging it free. It felt strangely heavy for its size. He popped the lid open and gasped. Inside were items that should never have been hidden in a lunchbox: a half-empty bottle of ibuprofen, a bruised and battered flip phone with a shattered screen, a wrinkled note scrawled in messy handwriting. "If you tell anybody, They'll take you away from your mama forever." Charles's hand trembled slightly as he put the lid back on. His heart pounded painfully against his ribs. Every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. He sat there for a long moment, the rumble of the idling bus engine the only sound. Outside, Aaliyah's apartment door had closed, but a dim light flickered behind the threadbare curtains. Charles knew he couldn't just drive away and pretend he hadn't seen it. He returned to the driver's seat and pulled his phone from the glove compartment. For a few seconds, he just stared at it, debating. He didn't want to make assumptions. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe the poor girl was just being bullied at school and scared of teachers or classmates. But deep down, he knew better. Instead of calling the principal, who Charles suspected would file a report and leave it at that, he made a different choice. He called his neighbor and close friend, Officer Raymond Davis of the Decatur Police Department. Raymond picked up on the second ring. "Charlie, what's up?" Charles spoke quietly, laying out what he had found, describing Aaliyah's daily tears, the lunchbox under the seat, the threatening note. There was a pause on the line. Then Raymond's voice dropped into a serious register. "Stay put," Raymond said. "I'm 5 minutes away." True to his word, a patrol car pulled up next to the bus within minutes, lights off, moving quietly. Raymond climbed out, his uniform crisp, his dark eyes scanning the apartment complex with trained precision. Charles handed over the lunchbox without a word. Raymond's jaw tightened as he read the note. "I'll need to do a welfare check," Raymond said grimly. "You sure you saw her go into that apartment?" Charles nodded. "Unit 14C. Raymond nodded back and headed up the sidewalk, radioing for backup. Charles sat back, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His mind raced with questions. What if he had missed the signs? How many days had Aaliyah suffered in silence before someone noticed? His throat burned with guilt and helplessness. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. Officers moved quickly but carefully, knocking first, then announcing themselves. When there was no answer, they gained entry with a master key from the complex manager, who had shown up looking nervous and confused. Charles watched from the bus as the front door swung open. What happened next made his heart clench painfully. Aaliyah emerged, clutching a tattered teddy bear to her chest. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, her thin shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself invisible. Behind her, a woman stumbled into view, clearly intoxicated, hair matted, yelling incoherently. Charles felt a wave of sickness as he realized the woman barely noticed Aaliyah, focused instead on screaming at the officers about mindin' their damn business. One of the officers gently knelt beside Aaliyah, speaking softly, while another escorted the woman, presumably her mother, out of the apartment in handcuffs. Raymond came back to the bus, his face grim. "Neglect charges," he said quietly. "Looks like more than that, too. We'll have CPS here in a minute." Charles nodded mutely. He felt old, suddenly, bone deep, tired. But he also felt something else burning under his ribs. A fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt since the days he wore uniform himself. He wouldn't let this child fall through the cracks, not on his watch. Charles remained seated behind the wheel, watching as Aaliyah was gently led toward a patrol car. She clutched her teddy bear like a life raft, her dark eyes wide and uncertain. Officer Raymond Davis knelt beside her, speaking in low tones meant to soothe, but the girl flinched at every sudden movement around her. Charles' chest tightened. He had seen soldiers look like that. Raw, stripped of safety, eyes too old for their faces. Aaliyah was placed carefully in the back of a police cruiser, separate from the car where her mother, still cursing and thrashing, had been secured. Charles knew this wasn't the end of her pain. only the beginning of a long, painful process. As the Child Protective Services worker, a woman named Ms. Darlene Monroe